Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching YourTown Television. I'm with Jeffrey Munks. Where we left off is at the Executive Learning Office. So what were the takeaways? What did you learn in this?
Well, nothing like the Executive Learning Office had ever existed in Navy previously. And our charge was to look at the 232 admirals in Navy and craft individualized executive development programs from the moment they were selected throughout the course of their career, so that they would have continuous opportunities to learn and grow, not just in general, but the very specific, discrete knowledge and skills and abilities they would need in order to execute the billet that they filled. So it was kind of a mass customization of learning within a niche market, the 232 admirals in the Navy. And in trying to set the stage for success of the program, one of the first things we had to do was crack the code for competing for mind share. These are 232 people who are not sitting around looking for things to do. They're all incredibly busy. So the prospect of convincing 35 of them at a time to take 10 days out of their incredibly busy world and come engage with us in a structured, intensive residential learning program, that was a daunting proposition. So the first thing that we did was we laid our own groundwork. And I had read a number of books by folks like John Cotter and Campbell and others talking about the idea of a guiding coalition. And that concept was find key stakeholders who are in senior positions throughout the organization that you're trying to impact, bring them together and give them a reason to be concerned about the success of your program. And for us, it was all the senior sponsors of Navy. Included among that group was the head of resource allocation for the Navy, an admiral by the name of Mike Mullen. And if that name sounds familiar, he was a one-star commanding the Washington Battle Group in the story we talked about earlier with USS Typhoon. Well, fast forward to 2003, 2004, Admiral Mullen was now a three-star admiral in charge of resources for the Navy. So we selected him for the Guiding Coalition, and he willingly participated. And he got what you could characterize as skin in the game, because he could see that if we were successful, it would give him stronger candidates within the Admiralty to work for him. And he became a strong supporter of our program. Well, a couple years later, when Admiral Mullen was selected to be the next Chief of Naval Operations, the very first phone call he made was to Phil Quast, the ELO. Admiral Mullen was in Italy at the time as the head of U.S. forces in Europe, in Naples. And Phil flew to Naples, sat down with Admiral Mullen, who told him, look, as CNO, I'm going to concentrate on three things. One, I'm going to concentrate on today's Navy, what we need to do to accomplish our mission in the here and now. Two, I'm going to put another third of my time on the future Navy. What do we have to do to position for emerging threats in a changing world? And the third thing I'm going to spend my time on is development of my senior leaders, which that was us. And he said, and I'm going to look to you to do that. And so when Admiral Mullen called together all the admirals for an all-flag conference, he stood before them and he said, the first thing I'm going to do when I'm looking to who I'm going to select to take the next big job in Navy is I'm going to look at what you guys have done to improve yourself, to grow yourself, to demonstrate a commitment to continuous learning. And to find that out, I'm going to call Admiral Quast, the Executive Learning Officer. So if you want to grow yourself, if you want to learn, if you want to be that next leader, call Admiral Quast and look for opportunities to learn. That's all it took. The phone started ringing off the hook. Filling those 35 seats was never a problem again.
See that, and I guess this works for every, kind of every organization.
Yeah, I think it's universally applicable, the idea of looking for, encouraging, and nurturing senior leader champions, and opening the aperture broad enough to include in those champions people who have the potential to one day ascend to the most senior role within the organization, I think is a wonderful investment of time and energy for all the right reasons.
Let's go on to collaborative strategic leadership in complex environments.
Sure.
And explain what that means.
Yeah. Well, it didn't mean anything up until 2011 when I got a request from one of the leaders of the U.S. Partnership for Peace Training and Education Center, which is right here on the campus of the Naval Postgraduate School. And he explained that Bosnia and Herzegovina was having a heck of a time finishing the job of clearing unexploded landmines and ordnance from the fields all across the country. Something like 3 to 5 million landmines and pieces of ordnance were still in the ground and tragically still killing people. And there was confusion, a lack of good cooperation and collaboration between and among the 20 to 30 organizations that had responsibility for some aspect of that cleanup. And these were organizations that ranged from the local as private companies and NGOs all the way up to the United Nations. Local, state, international, global. And when an incident would occur, and typically it would be kids playing soccer in a field and one of the kids steps on a landmine and is killed. An old man goes into the woods to cut firewood, and when he cuts into a tree, his axe hits a landmine that had been planted 15 years ago and grew up into the trunk of the tree, and he's killed. Well, that would trigger a response, and you'd get the public safety directorate, the civil defense folks, the armed forces, the police. Everybody would come out, and the first thing that would happen was they would argue over primacy. Who's going to take the lead? Who's going to do what to whom to respond to this? And as a result of that kind of lack of collaboration and cooperation, they were way overdue, way over the line on the target date to get this job of cleanup completed. It was supposed to be done by 2009. Here it was 2011, and they still had millions of landmines to clear. So the international community, and in particular the United States Partnership for Peace Training and Education Center and the Department of Defense, had a vested interest in seeing Bosnia and Herzegovina get this job done because it was one of the gating factors that was keeping them from entering the EU. They had to get this job done. So I was asked if I could craft a program, envision and then craft a program that might help accelerate the process. And I had been thinking about this in a different context, the whole issue of dealing with wicked problems. This was a wicked problem. And what I came up with was the concept for a program called Collaborative Strategic Leadership in Complex Environments. Collaborative strategic leadership. You've got the folks at the UN, you've got folks at the World Bank, you've got folks at the International Trust, you've got folks in the armed forces. They all come from different domains. And in many respects, though they all might be speaking Bosnian or Serbian or Croatian, they're all speaking different languages reflective of the domains and traditions that they come from. So when they would sit down at a table together, it would be hard for me to naturally and intuitively understand and embrace your perspective and what a home run looked like for you. I was focused on what it looked like for me and my own perspective. So I recruited a couple faculty at the Naval Postgraduate School, just absolutely phenomenal people, Susan Hocevar and Gail Fan Thomas. And the three of us put our heads together and we started building a curriculum. And at the early stages of that process, I took a trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I met with 14 individuals who represented those different organizations. And I conducted interviews with them as what I'd characterize as a discovery process. And that was a very sobering experience. Many of the young folks that I dealt with, particularly out of the civil protection directorates, were just absolutely committed to getting this job done, satisfying all the requirements to join the European community, and getting on with life in that tripartite country where Serb, Bosniak, and Croat were all working to get along. But I also interviewed one fellow who kind of gave me cause to pause. When I got to a question in that 25-question list that asked him the equivalent of, what's a home run look like for you? His response was, we just want to get the multinational force out of here so we can get back to doing what we do best, killing each other. And he was serious. And that comment really painted the visceral and impactful picture of the spectrum of emotions, the spectrum of perspectives, the distance that country still had to go to, to close the wounds that had been caused by that war. But the totality of data that I was able to gather provided, rich grist for us to sort and sift, and we crafted what turned out to be a 3-year engagement. And Susan, Gail, and I went over the course of 3 years, and the program got off to a great launch, and in part because the native language, the mother tongue for Bosnia and Herzegovina is not English, right? And in fact, there are many people there who speak very little English. When I first went over as part of my research, I had a meeting with the Minister of Civil Affairs. He was one of them. His English was, he didn't want to use English. And I spoke no Bosnian. So he called down to a clerical pool and had a young woman who come up who spoke high school level English. It was not very good. We were not communicating. But he had a big office. He had a conference table with a speakerphone. I motioned to the phone and asked if I could use it. And he said, sure. So I dialed the number to Language Line here in Monterey. I requested a Bosnian interpreter, had one like that, and through the speakerphone, using a professional trained Bosnian interpreter, I was able to communicate with him, and he was able to communicate in the language that he thinks, conceptualizes, and makes decisions in, and he made a decision to support this program lock, stock, and barrel. It was great. And then when we did the kickoff for the program, I had to do the opening remarks. And by that time, I had met a wonderful young man who was a major in the Bosnian Armed Forces. And he was a fluent English speaker. His mother tongue was Bosnian. And so I wrote my opening remarks, which I usually don't do. I usually just kind of speak extemporaneously. But I wrote 2 minutes worth of opening remarks and asked this wonderful fellow if he would translate it into phonetic Bosnian. And he did. Sent it back to me. And then I asked if he would coach me. So I practiced for 2 weeks. Then I got on a Skype-type session with him and practiced in front of him. And he corrected my pronunciation and my pace. And when the program opened with the head of the Bosnian Armed Forces, with the Minister of Civil Affairs, with all of these grand high poobahs from Bosnia and Herzegovina in attendance, I was able to take the podium and open my remarks in Bosnian. And over the course of 2 minutes in Bosnian, I thanked them as graciously as I could for allowing us to bring the program to their country and conduct it in English, a difficult language for anyone to manage. And they just absolutely went nuts. And I went on with my remarks in English using the UN-style headsets with interpreters in a booth. But just doing that 2-minute opening in Bosnian,
which they appreciated.
Well, it demonstrated respect.
Uh-huh.
And it demonstrated that we were committed to doing whatever it took to make this an effective, authentic, trust-based relationship, not transaction.
So, Jeffrey, how important are intangibles like that in all across the business spectrum?
I think that they're invaluable. I think they materially contribute to success. And that's something that I've done throughout my adult life. I had an opportunity to open an art exhibit for Filipino Americans in San Francisco, and the Consul General was there and a bunch of dignitaries from the Philippines. And I did the same thing. I wrote the first 2 minutes in Tagalog and spent 2 weeks getting coached by a woman I worked with who spoke Tagalog and opened the remarks for the program in Tagalog, and it had the same kind of effect. It's basic human courtesy and respect. It's sticking out a hand and saying, I care about you. I care enough to invest time and energy to help you.
Was that intrinsic, or is this something that you've learned over time?
I I don't know whether I learned it or stumbled across it, but the first time I experienced it, I became a believer in doing whatever it takes to build authentic bridges.
And authentic being the key word.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's go to Viking 11.
Viking 11, about the time that that Bosnia was starting to wind down, Viking 11 was starting to wind up. There was some crossover there. Viking 11 was the world's largest public-private multinational peace operations exercise in the world. And it was sponsored by and organized by the Swedish Armed Forces. This same organization, the United States Partnership for Peace Training and Education Center here at the Naval Postgraduate School, asked if I would participate in Viking 11 by doing something that had never been done before, and that was bringing in an American civilian law enforcement agency to support peace operations.
So what is Viking 11? Just
Viking
a little
11
background
is
for us.
a virtual online exercise that's designed to promote cooperation and collaboration among allied nations of the world, all in an effort to learn how to work together effectively in a troubled post-conflict region of the world to try to keep it from devolving back into conflict. So instead of physically moving 30,000 people to some place on the planet to go through an exercise, the entire thing was simulated virtually with very sophisticated software programs, virtual environment programs, managed from a huge comm center in Sweden with participants in something like 30 or 33 countries and 30,000 people. So I reached out to the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in Redwood City, California, and got them to volunteer to be the civilian American law enforcement agency that would participate in this global multinational peace operations program that was based out of Sweden.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
I'm Mark Baer. I'm with Jeffrey Munks, and we're going to have one more episode, and we'll sum it up in the next episode. You're watching YourTown Television. We'll be back.